I'd like to welcome everybody to the session. I'm going to pull up some introductory slides. There we go. This is the Energy Climate Community Assessment session of NACDEP conference. We thank everybody for being here, and I thank myself and others that are hosting through Zoom. This is the schedule for today's session. We're going to start off with Eric Romich from Ohio State University Extension. Then we'll have Paul LaChapelle from Montana State University Extension and some other cohorts that are working on the National Extension Climate Initiative. We'll finish up with Christopher Seeger from Iowa State University Extension. We are recording this session. I think if you can mute your mic, we'd appreciate it. Each session is going to be about 20 minutes in length, including the Q&A. Please unmute and use video during the Q&A only, especially if you're having some issues with broadband connections. Use the chat for any questions you have of our presenters. Hopefully you've all had your lunch, but if you need refreshments, hopefully they're, as Brian put in our bullets here, available close by, and restrooms as well. And he put in a listening tip if to refrain from multitasking and paying attention to presenters. He suggests using some object in your hand to prevent that from happening. I'd like to thank the sponsors that are listed here in this slide. When we went to virtual, we kept a lot of the sponsors that were also sponsoring for face-to-face if we had it in Portsmouth. So we'd like to thank all of them for doing that. Okay. Let me admit Tim Kelsey. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to turn it over to Eric, our first presenter.
Thanks, Peter. I am going to get set up here real quick, and as I'm getting the slides pulled up, I'm just curious if you guys click the participants button on the bottom. Just a simple yes or no question. How many of you are currently experiencing activity with utility scale solar development in your states? I'm kind of curious to see what's going on out there. Okay, it looks like a few of you are dealing with some similar things that we're facing here in Ohio, and so hopefully you'll find some of this information useful. You know, originally we were hoping that we'd have a little more time, possibly a half-hour, 90-minute session in Portsmouth to go over some of the details of our workshop, but you know, given the structure, we're really hoping to provide you an overview of what's happening and really guide you towards some of the resources that we've developed here in Ohio. And the resources that we're talking about are related to solar leasing tools. So we've experienced a lot of utility scale solar development here in Ohio, and I think likewise in other parts of the country. And we want to help you recognize that some of these resources that we've, one second, my slide's not advancing, there we go. Peter, real quick, are you seeing the slides clearly?
I am, and yes, I am.
Okay, good. So, so we've developed some resources around solar leasing, and what I'd like to talk about today is just real briefly the trends related to utility scale solar development. I'd like to kind of have a discussion around solar energy and land use that's starting to kind of fester up here in Ohio, and this is something that's relatively new to us. And then have a little bit of an overview of the resources that we've developed and how you might be able to apply those in your states. And then as we wrap up, of course, we'll have some open dialogue and some Q&A. So jumping kind of into the trends, and I think a lot of us are fairly familiar with this, so I don't want to dwell on it, but I wanted to just kind of start out with kind of what are we seeing in terms of solar installations nationwide. And we really started to see solar kind of work its way into the national energy mix in 2010 and kind of grow from there. And at this point, it's still a relatively small sliver. It's still just a little less than 2% nationally, but you can see the color-coded bars here are representing different types of solar development. So the green and blue are representing what we would refer to as behind the meter development. So those would be solar projects that are installed on homes, businesses, farms, community centers, you name it. But it would be designed sized and designed to offset the load of that specific facility. So we would refer to that as behind the meter. What's illustrated with the red bars there is what we're talking about today, and that's utility scale solar development. So these are often much larger projects, and the primary difference is that they're interconnected on either the distribution or transmission side of the infrastructure. So as you can kind of see in the chart, it was somewhat balanced early on, but we've really started to see kind of the takeover of utility scale in terms of the market additions. And, kind of just looking solely in 2018, 68% of all of the solar electricity that was generated was from utility scale technology. So looking ahead, the projections for 2020 were actually rather strong. And this is, of course, kind of pre-COVID-19 pandemic. So, of course, these numbers are going to be changed a little bit. But we're really expecting another big year for solar additions of 24 gigawatts DC. Mind you, the chart peaks out at 16 gigawatts. So we were really kind of looking at another one of these record years that we were going to see spike up. And one of the reasons that we saw a big spike in 2016, and another reason that we were expecting it again in 2020, is related to the schedule for the federal investment tax credit program. So this slide kind of shows how that program is currently stair-stepping down. In 2016, that program was originally scheduled to expire, and then ultimately it was extended through the end of 2019. So there was kind of that rush to the finish line mentality where developers were trying to get projects in before the tax credit went away. And now we're kind of working in an environment where it's going from 30% down to 26, and then it's going to continue to drop each year. So that's one of the reasons that we're seeing a lot of activity on the ground, is trying to get these projects in when we can still maximize the tax credit portion of that program. The other reason that we're seeing a lot of development, very honestly, is price. So we've seen significant price reductions on the installation side of solar technology. I'm going to show a chart that kind of demonstrates two different price points, and it's based on the different technologies. And I don't want to spend a ton of time, but I think it's worth noting that the two primary types of technology for utility scale solar include fixed tilt, which is what you're going to see on your left here, and that's just that. It's set at a predetermined tilt, and that's where it sets. Kind of an emerging, I guess, technology, not necessarily new, but we're seeing more of them being developed or actually adopted, is single axis trackers that would follow the sun throughout the day from the east to the west. And that's what you see on the right here. So when we look at the price points for these, you can see there's a pretty dramatic drop off. We've actually seen a 77% decrease on the installation cost per DC watt for fixed tilt systems. It's gone from $4.63 per DC watt down to $1.06 per DC watt over here. Now these numbers come from the U.S. Department of Energy's National Lab. They put out a quarterly cost benchmark report it's an all-inclusive cost. So this is basically a flip the switch and turn it on price. It includes the cost of all the equipment, net profit, overhead, installation, interconnection, permitting, engineering. All of those costs are included in these numbers as you look at them. And I've found them to be really accurate compared to projects that we see being developed on the ground here in Ohio. Okay, I want to transition a little bit into a discussion, talk about solar energy and land use. And this is something that's relatively new, at least to us here in Ohio. So I want to start out with a picture here, and this is a project that I was fortunate enough to work on. as involved with this back in 2009, 2010. And this is a picture taken from an airplane, and you can see the runway kind of running in the middle here. It's a 12 megawatt project that sets on 83 acres. There's 159,200 panels involved, 14,600 posts supporting the racking. By most metrics in 2010, this was a large project. And I think what you're going to find, based on what we're seeing here today in Ohio, this is relatively small at this point. Looking at projects kind of in the development pipeline, in Ohio, any electrical generation facility greater than 50 megawatts has to go through the Ohio Power Siting Board for siting approval. And so this is a list of 12 solar projects that are currently have submitted paperwork to the siting board. And you can kind of see the size for each of these projects over here. I mean, we're no longer talking about 12 megawatt projects. These are, 70 to 300 megawatt solar facilities. And then you can see the corresponding acres for each of the projects over here in the far column. And again, you start to see the issue as you talk about communities that are now being targeted for this type of development that could consume literally thousands of acres to support the solar panels. And we're starting to see a very similar feel within these communities that are targeted as what we've dealt with wind development in the past, where you have some communities that are really supportive, you have others that are rather opposed, and then a lot of them that are somewhere in the middle. And so this is one of the reasons, I guess, that we're starting to develop some resources, is this type of development is really active in Ohio. And from what I've seen with some of you that have raised your hands, it's taking place in other states now as well. So as we've seen the price come down on solar and the size of the projects get larger, one of the things that it's doing is kind of highlighting one of the weaknesses, quite honestly, of solar that we really haven't talked about in the past, because the magnitude wasn't there to really justify that discussion. And what I'm talking about is, solar energy is a technology that at the end of the day has an inherently low power density. And so it takes a lot of space to generate a little bit of power compared to other sources. And just kind of a little disclaimer here, that's not to say that I'm suggesting solar is bad or another technology is good. And that's the beauty of working in energy education, right? Is as you look at this, all of these technologies have their strengths and weaknesses. But as you can see in the chart here, we're looking at how many acres required to produce a megawatt. And you can see, our traditional baseload fossil sources that are less than an acre. The note here with wind is it typically is between 3/4 of an acre to an acre. And that's the direct land impact. So the note there is that that's only counting for the portion of the land that's permanently changed. You can still farm around most of the wind turbines, whereas with solar, that's still somewhat of a limitation. And just to kind of play that out a little bit, so as we look at our energy mix, you can kind of see over here in the chart on the right, coal accounts for 23% of the energy mix. Solar is right around 1.8%. If you look at our coal generation fleet, we currently have 274 gigawatts of coal-fired capacity. If we were to convert all of that coal-fired capacity to solar, we would be looking at covering the entire state of Washington with solar panels. Now, obviously, this is just discussing the scope and scale. I mean, that would cause all kinds of logistical and distribution and delivery nightmares. But I'm trying to help illustrate the point of the frustration that we're seeing in some of the communities that we're working with that are now seeing thousands and thousands of acres being used with for solar panel development now. So that kind of helps set the stage, I guess, with some of the questions that we're getting. And I want to talk a little bit now about some of the resources that we've developed, and then kind of point you to where you can get some of that information. And this really goes back to early 2018 when I started to get a lot of phone calls from farmers who were contacted to lease large chunks of ground, anywhere from 500 to 1,000 or more acres. And those phone calls became pretty frequent, to where I was talking with a couple of colleagues that I think this is something that we need to start looking into and develop some resources for. Quite honestly, it had a very similar feel to kind of 2007, 2008, when we started to see the oil and gas leasing move into the eastern part of the state. And so I worked with Peggy Hall, who's our ag law specialist, and Peggy and I started to develop some materials, and we got our resources finalized in August of 2019. The fourth quarter of 2019, we delivered 10 programs, and they're structured typically as kind of a half-day workshop. So we were usually at like a 3-hour program to deliver the whole workshop. And you can see kind of where that was taking place. Most of it was down in that southwest quadrant, where on the earlier map you saw that's where the development was taking place. We did have 4 programs in March that were canceled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so unfortunately, some of the momentum and the programs we had on the calendar were placed on hold. A little quick overview of some of the resources I'm talking about. We've developed initially kind of a law bulletin. So it's a quick 3-page summary that is kind of a checklist type structure. And that leads you into the Farmland Owner's Guide to Solar Leasing. That's a much more comprehensive tool, and kind of pictured here. It's a 43-page document that was developed with some funding support from USDA's National Ag Law Center. And that's a tool that I think would be useful to many of you in other states. While some of it is certainly, based on Ohio law, I would say, most of that document you can take, and the basics of the leasing process and what to consider is going to apply in about any state. The interesting thing with the bulletin, or the 43-page document, is it's really based off of the review of about 14 leasing agreements. So we were able to get our hands on some actual leases that farmers were being presented, and do a review of those, and kind of pull out the common thread. So what were we seeing that was that was good? What were we seeing that was maybe concerning? And then were there any lessons learned that we would certainly want to make other farmers that are considering these lease agreements aware of? We also have presentation materials, program evaluation tools. We're looking at, under that umbrella of utility scale solar development, a couple of additional resources. We're working on a statewide economic impact analysis that would take into account the displacement factor of losing several thousand acres of ag production. And then also looking at alternative vegetation management strategies. So are there ways that we can maximize the land use with these larger projects, and still have some type of value coming off that ground? The program's really broken down into 2 phases. The first is really focused on the development trends. So why is this happening? Kind of regulatory and siting process, local economic benefits, public health and safety, construction process, really trying to kind of set the stage for development process as a whole. Whereas the second part is really focused on legal issues. And so part 2 of our 3-hour workshop, we really dive into the details of, what are the legal considerations? What are your rights as a landowner? Neighbor and community relations, and then kind of the process of that lease, and what are the different components that you're going to experience kind of in the initial phase, the development phase, the operational phase. And that's, again, for those in Ohio, Pennsylvania, oil and gas states in general. This is stuff that is very similar. We've been dealing with this. 2 slides real quick to kind of close on again, we were kind of cut short here earlier with some of our outreach efforts, but we did do a little an evaluation on a couple of our early programs, and just asking how do they plan to use this as a result of the workshop. And you can see that most of them, 98%, were planning to do something with the information, which is good. This is a number that's based on the total number of workshops we've had, I think is very low. We tend to have a lot of county commissioners and local elected officials attend those programs. But and then kind of an open-ended question, just tell us about, whether it's positive or negative, what are the issues that you're interested related to utility scale solar development? And, one of the things that came up that we really weren't anticipating was this concern over public health and toxic panels. Initially, that was not part of our program, but, looking back at our first 8 workshops, that was a topic that came up at every one. So we started to kind of develop some resources to address that as well. So, but you can see these are the topics that those attending were kind of interested in. And I have one more slide that's going to kind of show you the URL, but I'm going to leave this up for a second while we open for questions. And then, Pete, I'll go ahead and share the URL where they could get that, and they can get my contact information. But at this point, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take those.
I don't see any questions yet, Eric, but I was just, what I was amazed is how much land it creates for solar farms. That's
yeah, and
something I learned.
Working on a project and again, kind of being on the ground in 2009 and 2010 when we built that 85-acre project, that was massive to us at the time. I mean, when you're standing in the front of that 85-acre site, you cannot see all of it. We're taking pictures from airplanes, and now that's small. So we're talking about projects that are, like I said, anywhere from 1,000 to 3,000 acres now, and we actually have one county that has 3 projects that are going to be impacting a portion of their county, and they're kind of in the epicenter of this, where it could be upwards of 6,000 acres in that county. That just because a project submitted an application to the Power Siting Board obviously does not guarantee that it's going to be built, but if all 3 of those were to be built, that would certainly be a large chunk of ground in that community.
Yeah, in Pennsylvania, there was an initiative that came up with a report last year that they're trying to increase the solar amount of solar energy created to, I think they want to get to 10% of the energy consumption in Pennsylvania from solar. And right now it's like half of 1% was their goal, and it's not even achieved that. So I know in Pennsylvania there's a big initiative by energy companies approaching landowners.
We've had a lot of development in Ohio over the last decade that's really been behind the meter. So most of our work, our outreach has been working with farmers and businesses to do modeling and financial metrics and analysis to say, here's how you optimize a project for your farm or business to maximize the net present value. And, so it was all that behind the meter type work that was taking place. And there's just this major transition to these larger projects. And, again, when you look at Ohio, and I haven't ran the numbers, in the last several months, but, we had just under 3,000 projects certified by the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio. And combined, it was like 210 megawatts of capacity. And basically one project now is going to have, more capacity than everything that we've developed up to this point. So any other questions? I guess just to kind of point on this closing slide here, this is my email address in the corner here. Of course, my colleague Peggy Hall, who's the co-author on that resource, is there as well. This is the URL at the bottom. It's kind of a shortened Go link. So go.osu.edu/utility/solar. And you'll find a PDF available for the resources that I shared. And certainly, if you have interest, feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email, and we can talk in more detail.
There is a question, and it's something that we're dealing with in Pennsylvania. Daniel wants to know: isn't there a vegetative cover under the panels? Is runoff a big issue? I know we're dealing with that. You can maybe put some, because a lot of it's ag land being converted, and maybe pollinators are talking about.
As you think about runoff, that is one of the biggest issues that we hear about, is the concern of water runoff and subsurface drainage here in Ohio. We have a lot of our fields have systematic field tiling. And so again, I talked about that 83-acre project. There were 14,600 posts that were rammed into the ground. So, when you start to think about field tile underneath subsurface field tile, that's a big issue. And, the landowners that are adjoining the property that don't necessarily have a lease are really concerned about, what happens if the tile's damaged and I have water backing up onto my property. In terms of surface runoff, the one thing at this point, most of these larger projects are simply putting down a turf grass and mowing. And that's the challenge, is there has to be something better than, I mentioned the 12 projects in Ohio. If you combine those, that's a footprint of over 20,000 acres. We have to do something better than mow, 20,000 acres. Pollinators has been something that has had traction in other states. We've had a couple projects here that have used pollinators, and they've struggled a little bit, so they weren't necessarily established or maintained properly. And then you have some issues with weeds and invasive weeds, and that's another major concern in our ag lands. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. I have been working with some developers to establish a test plot. I have some interest in trying to kind of see if we can't better design these systems to support hay production, looking at maybe a alfalfa and cool season grasses rotation. Especially as we start looking at single axis tracking panels, because with the tracker panels, you can get a little more space within the alleyway by rotating the panels perpendicular to the ground, or I guess straight up and down, you'd say.
Okay, well, I think, Eric, we're going to have to transition to the next presentation. So if you want to stop sharing, I'll turn it over to Paul.
Absolutely. Thanks,
Thank
Peter.
you very much, Eric. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Thanks everyone for joining today. And we'll have a number of co-presenters on this session. And our objective today is to talk about a new initiative called the National Extension Climate Initiative. And we also hope to spend a little bit of time talking about what we're doing within our states, our communities, our states, and our regions in terms of climate change, education, and research. So I'll take just a couple of minutes to talk about the National Extension Climate Initiative, and then I'll turn it over to my co-presenters. And I think I'll share my screen here. So give me just a second, if you would, to let me get that set up.
Paul, Lisa she had to call in, so she reached out to you if you'll have slides.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and I guess that's a 203. I hope that's
okay. We'll she'll be presenting, I think, fourth with our other presenters. So
okay.
Hopefully you can see the screen there. Is that being shown?
I can see it, yes.
Great, okay. Well, so I guess the first question is, why another initiative? We have a lot of different initiatives, from energy to sustainability, et cetera, in Extension. Well, a number of us felt that Extension simply wasn't providing the necessary leadership to coordinate effective climate change education and research across the systems. We recognize that some states are being very proactive, and there are even some regional and multi-state efforts, but there hasn't been a national coordinated effort since the Land Grant and Sea Grant Climate Extension Summit that took place in March of 2012 in Maryland. And they produced this report, which I'll show you here real quickly. Hopefully you can see that report. Peter, you can confirm with me that that's up.
I can see it.
Okay,
Yep.
Great. So that took place again back in March of 2012, titled The Role of Extension in Climate Adaptation in the United States. As far as I know, there hasn't been another national initiative to really coordinate all of us across the land grant system, across our associations, across all of our land grant universities doing outreach work, and more importantly, perhaps connecting our Sea Grant, the important work that our NOAA colleagues at the Sea Grant institutions are doing. So that's the first reason why we're starting this initiative. The second reason is that climate change, and I'm likely preaching to the choir here, is recognized as a planetary emergency. It's a crisis unlike any that we've had to deal with in the past, and it's pervasive. It doesn't discriminate. Everyone will be affected by it, and it's irreversible to a certain extent. The decisions that we're making now will determine the prospects for a healthy life for generations to come. And again, won't get into too much of the science because of our time constraints here, but we're seeing more evidence now of what the projections of what a crisis this is can be. Authors Hugh Goldberg et al. In the journal Science just last year stated that this is the greatest threat to humanity and global ecosystems in the coming years. And they caution that an increase in global mean surface temperature of 2 degrees Celsius or higher than the pre-industrial period look increasingly unmanageable. The IPCC says that temps above 2 degrees are deemed unsafe. And the IPCC has also forecast that we have about 8 years at our current rates of emissions before we spend out our carbon budget that will send us on a trajectory to exceed that 2 degrees Celsius. Other projections from the National, Stefan et al. In the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences concluded that reinforcing feedback loops could push the Earth systems further beyond 2 degrees C into what they call a hothouse Earth, leading to much higher global temperatures and sea levels than we've seen in the last 1.2 million years. So this is what many people are calling the silent pandemic, the pandemic that's affecting everyone, a disease of sorts that we're just not is just not taking the attention that it deserves. So we came up with this idea of the National Extension Climate Initiative, and I'll go back to the website here. This is just the initial landing page, which I'll walk everyone through in just a moment. This came out of work that Chris Jones and some others in NREP, the Natural Resource Professional Organization, had been doing for years, a client science initiative. And I talked with Chris about expanding that along with some colleagues here in NACDEP, wondering if we could do a better job of sharing information, not just within our program areas and our associations, but across our program areas. And so this initiative is the goal of this initiative is to link climate change related education and research across our extension program areas and associations. And to do this, we have 2 broad objectives, and you can see them here. I've kind of, we spell them out on the website as 4 objectives, but I'll just mention them as 2 objectives. Broadly, to create venues to communicate, to share any kind of information on our climate change programming, past programming, current and future work, with anyone who's self-selected. So this is a process that's open to anyone who wants to be in it. You don't have to be a member of a certain association or of a land-grant institution. So it's open to faculty and staff. And we're meeting now regularly via a listserv. We have video conferences that we're holding every month, and information on this webpage that I've also pasted in the chat room. We're also trying to create a formal network that meets regularly and also meets with our association conferences to affirm progress. So we would have a group of individuals that represent those associations that would be coming together to talk about what 4-H is doing, what FCS is doing, et cetera, and representing those associations and various committees and other organizations that exist within our land grant system. So let me talk to you real briefly about what the website looks like here. And you can see that what we've done is we've created this push-pin map as kind of an inventory of the over 125 individuals now that are part of this network. And you can see we've got them representatives across the United States, Hawaii, Alaska, Guam. But if you click on the broken square here in the corner, we're going to view the larger map. And hopefully that's coming through, Peter, all right, for everybody. What you can do is actually zoom
I see it.
spatially. Good, thanks for confirming. How that distribution is represented spatially across the United States, you can view on individuals here and pull up their information. Again, this is information that they've provided to us, but what we're really trying to do is to create kind of some searchable content here. So I'm just going to put in the word coastal, and anybody who has listed that word in their profiles, I'll just pick on Martha here, and you can see Martha is located in Michigan. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit here. You can see name, title, institution, email, location, web resources that Martha provided to us, and then just a short statement on areas of interest and expertise. And what we're trying to do is catalog this across the extension system. Again, we've got, well, I'll go back. We've got about 85 people now that have provided information. Again, all searchable. I'll just put in another term. So if you're interested in trying to link up with other individuals, again, you can see where those folks are located, what information they've listed to self-describe web resources and areas of expertise, etc. So I've taken a bit more time than I wanted to just providing an overview of NECI, of the, or NECSI. We're still not quite sure how we're going to be calling this. So just coming up with a logo now and really trying to formalize this idea of the initiative. But what we wanted to do was spend a few minutes now hearing from some of our co-presenters about what they're doing in their communities or states and regions, and then we'll come back, we'll circle back, and we'll have kind of an open discussion to get feedback from all of you about how this new national initiative could be most beneficial to everybody. So with that, I'll turn it over to Peter, and Peter, you can take over the host.
You're going to stop sharing, and I don't know who's somebody else
Okay.
going to share a set of slides. So is that Daniel? You want to share your slides?
Or Peter, I think we'll go.
Or Meyer?
Next.
Go ahead, Paul.
Oh, okay.
Who's
If you're
next?
talking, is there another Peter? Another Peter beside myself? Or
Yeah, there's
maybe
Peter. Yeah.
Okay, that's a confusion.
And you'll want to unmute yourself, Peter. I think you're still muted. There you go.
Good afternoon. This is Peter from Guam. For this session, we have several presenters to just share their short climate change story. And Paul, I appreciate the link that you provided and where those little nodes of activity related to this climate initiative. So in my earlier contribution to the work group, I reported that Guam is really moving forward with these kinds of climate change dialogue, and more importantly, engaging our local university to take the lead. And some of the areas that at least Extension is collaborating with is the strategic planning and addressing information, specifically flooding. And what I wanted to share with the group is the importance of other federal entities. I know Paul mentioned the seed grant, and Guam is actually trying to get its program formally incorporated. But what's interesting is the initiative taken by the local government to sponsor a Silver Jackets program. And the Silver Jackets program involves the Army Corps of Engineers. And in order to look at flooding and other natural disaster-related challenges, is to formally do an assessment across all planning work areas and specifically address how they can leverage all the different partners in addressing flood risk and other natural disasters. And just as, you know, extension being in a collaborative role, we get invited to these sessions. And it's interesting to note that the Silver Jackets is an example of reaching out to our engagement efforts to say, how can we reach the community in the best way and address their information needs around specifically, again, flooding issues. And they've knocked on our doors to work out a program proposal and do an assessment, and it relates to the climate change initiative. The other component that is worth noting is the local government, again, is adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And Guam is part of a local 2030 island network. And that network focuses on goal area climate action number 13. And it's, again, interesting to note the kinds of crossover programming platforms across those 17 and the kinds of issues and information needs that, at least in Guam's experience, is very limited. So our role as an organization is to support the knowledge needs of these different collaborators, and more specifically, leverage the kinds of research expertise that exists within the university. And the region, of course, is the Marquesas governments. The one way to describe them is that my coining of their role is they're the version of islanders, first responders to severe impacts of climate change. So sea level rise. It's happening across all the different community capitals, if you want to use that as a framework to evaluate impacts. So these initiatives are all part of a program that our our governor has adopted called Guam Green Growth. It's a G3 initiatives, formalizing the, again, what Paul mentioned, how do we reach across different platforms, and how do we engage all the different collaborators interested in this. And of course, one of the challenges is dealing with who's the deep pockets and who are the experts to address the kinds of information or research needs that that are being requested. That's all, Paul.
Yeah, Paul, you got I guess there's about 6 minutes, so I think you have
Great.
3 more presenters to go.
All right, we'll make this quick. We'll go now to Dan Call in Kentucky. We'll just do a couple minutes each then.
I am ready and I will go fast. So shared the resources in the chat box. Just very quickly, I've got a few slides. Paul mentioned that, of course, we have a national initiative to address a global issue, but change happens at home. It starts with us. And so I want to highlight an initiative that's going on in Kentucky. It's called the Kentucky Climate Consortium. The consortium is a group of really researchers from 5 different state institutions, universities from across the state. And they are primarily focused on mutual learning and public education. And so this is a group of folks from very diverse fields that have come together with a passion for education around climate change. The challenge is really their driving question is, what is climate change and what does it mean for Kentucky? And so their current focus is looking at how can we take all the information that we have and make it very relevant and local, so that communities can digest it and start to respond to it. And so in doing so, my role as an extension community development person is to really think about how can we adapt this information so that we've got current, relevant, and high quality research available, but also make it in a way that's applicable to our communities. We've been working around the idea of community resilience, and a community that is resilient is one that's able to, that has an opportunity to plan and prepare to minimize and respond to disruptions. And so I'll just throw out a quick example of a recent publication, and that's using mind mapping. Mind mapping is a resource that we often look at impacts of a program. When we look back, we projected with it. We said if we can use the same mind mapping concept and process, but start to try to predict in the different aspects of community, how might this impact us? And what would that mean? Who would it impact? And then what kinds of actions might we take to start moving forward? So I'll share this as a resource. It's in the chat box also, but through CETIC, you'll see this Imagine the Implications tool and some others in terms of ways that extension can help facilitate the conversation to help communities respond to climate change.
Thanks, Dan. We'll move to Myra now. Myra from Ohio. And you'll want to unmute yourself, Myra, whenever you can. And I think you're still muted, Myra.
Okay, sorry about that. I think I've eaten up about half my time too. My name is Myra Moss. I'm with Ohio State University Extension, and I am an educator in community development. And I wanted today to talk very briefly about two programs that we have that deal with climate change, one directly and one indirectly. And the first one is Building Sustainable Communities, which is a planning program we do with communities. And I was really struck by the keynote speaker today who talked about intersectionality and how critically important that is to be able to address climate change issues. And that's basically what we feel we're doing through this program. We follow or honor the tenets of sustainability, which are inclusion, long-term, interconnected and balanced, and multidimensional, and the whole process reflects the makeup of the community. So we feel that this is a program that does definitely address climate change issues. To give you a real short highlight, one of the first programs we did in 2001 was the city of Kent, Ohio, which is also the home of Kent State University. And they wanted to become, through their visioning, a carless community. They were very much on the forefront of climate change, of environmental equity, and sustainability issues. So we work with them. They eventually built a multimodal facility, which served not only the community through bus and walking and bicycles, all sorts of different kinds of transportation modes. You could park your car there and then switch to another mode of transportation, or it was also regional in nature because the bus system was regional and the bicycle system trails were regional also. So that was a definite contribution to climate change. Then the other one is a colleague of mine, Tom Blaine, who some of you may know is an expert in climate change, has just updated a fact sheet which is very, very well written and very thorough on global climate change. And it was just updated in February of 2020. So that's a good resource. And here's the link. He also wrote a 4-H project idea starter. And he's given presentations in counties throughout the state of Ohio and is still doing that. And they have been very highly received, very positively received. So I think that that's also an excellent program that we're involved with, and I've included contact information on both of these slides, both websites and contact directly. So I encourage you to look into them further. Thank you.
Thanks, Myra. And if you could put those in the chat, that would be great. We weren't able to see your slides. But Peter, hopefully we have another minute or two to wrap up with Lisa. And if anyone—
Sure, you can yeah, we have time for Lisa.
Great.
I know she finally got on, so.
Great.
So good.
Thank
And
you.
if any of you have comments, feel free to type them into the chat box. I don't think we'll have time to address those, but questions or comments would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks so much for squeezing me in. I'll be brief, but I'm Lisa Wise. I'm the Climate Adaptation Program Manager with New Hampshire Sea Grant and Cooperative Extension. And I just wanted to briefly mention a couple of ways that we try to help New Hampshire communities deal with the impacts of climate change. So we're really trying to help municipal staff and board members and the broader community understand climate impacts by bringing them the best available science, such as the New Hampshire Coastal Flood Risk Summary Science and Guidance document that was just published earlier this year. And so we facilitate public input opportunities on those sorts of documents and the guidance. And now we're working on planning some public outreach around the guidance. We also have a program called Climate in the Classroom, where we try to build student literacy in climate and empower them to be the teachers about climate to their family and community members. And then lastly, we're involved with a variety of regional collaboratives around climate change, namely the New Hampshire Coastal Adaptation Work Group, which is a collaborative of about 25 or so organizations, agencies, municipalities, and we collaborate to host workshops on climate change, an annual climate summit, a King Tide photo contest to raise awareness and document the flood impacts that we're already seeing and that we will see more likely in the future. We recognize a municipal climate champion. So a variety of activities and efforts to raise awareness, help communities talk about their vulnerabilities, and start to move towards implementation of adaptation strategies. So that was a lot in a short amount of time. I can paste some links in the chat, and as well as my contact information. I'm happy to chat further offline.
Great. And Peter, thank you for providing a little extra time. And any questions or comments you might have, please provide them in the chat, and join us on the initiative via the link that I provided.
Great, thank you, Paul. Now I'm going to turn over to Chris Seeger from Iowa State Extension.
All right, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Great. So for those of you who haven't experienced this, when your computer does not let you get into Zoom, it's not a lot of fun. Luckily, I had a spare computer to go to that did let me in. So I'm not sure what was going on with Zoom not letting us in. I see Lisa smiling, so I'm not sure the pain was there, but I did feel it today. I'm going to go ahead and try and share this screen. And I just got this PowerPoint converted and moved over to this computer, so hopefully everybody can see it.
I can see it.
All right. Let's see if I can get this arranged here to work. Okay, we look good. Okay, so today I'm going to talk to you about a program we have at Iowa State University called the Data for Decision Makers program. It's a little bit different than the last two presentations in that we're sharing a different type of data with our constituents as well as our faculty and staff and extension. So the Data for Decision Makers basically are a series of themed data profiles for all 99 counties in the state of Iowa, as well as demographic reports for the over 900 communities that exist in the, throughout the state. So when we started this project several years ago, our goal was that we wanted to help our faculty and staff and students, as well as the general public and local leaders, be able to make effective decisions using data that was reliable and accessible. And so we started out just trying to put together a central repository that would include some of the frequently requested data that our office was getting, or people were asking us, can you help us find this or that on the internet? As we did this, we recognized that for a lot of our people we work with, that accessing the data was quite tedious. A lot of times they would only have to go maybe get this data once or twice a year, usually around grant writing time, so they could have the latest American Community Survey or other data sets they needed in their grant proposal. And the data would change. Sometimes it was hard for them to find the volume of data. Sometimes when they went to a page like the census to find it was just overwhelming because they weren't trained as to how to go find a specific piece of data. And even if they found that data, often what we found out was that they didn't have quite the technical ability to download it and convert, or what we call wrangle the data in data science, and get prepared for the needs that they had to use it for. So one other thing we often found was that if each county, let's say you had one person in each county that was doing this, that's quite a bit of duplication of efforts. They're all doing about the same time of year for the same type of grants. And so that was a waste of their time, and also a waste on resources. So our solution, like I said, was we developed this repository. And I'm not going to talk about the data repository so much today, as I want to focus on one of the products that we produce, which is the data for decision makers. And so this is our repository, but I'll move on. So our data for decision makers, like I said, these series of reports, we let the users come and select which reports they want. And one of the key things about our data for decision makers, or DDMs, is that they are created on the fly as requested. So how this is done is we've collected all this data from the cloud from various sources into one database, a local database that we control. That was our original plan from the start to do that. And we really didn't have a really good reason for doing that, honestly, at first. But when the government shut down a couple years ago, there went the census data. You couldn't access a lot of the census data tables and things like that, but you could still access our data for decision makers because we already had copied their data down. So that helped enforce for us that it was really good to go and grab that data, make a copy of it, organize it in our own database, and make it available. So as this data comes into our database, we send it out, we do some scripting, and we put it into these reports. They're called the data for decision makers. It looks like this. And next I'll take you through several of these. So in the first one here we're looking at, this is a county profile, and for Marshall County. And you'll notice that I have highlighted a couple items on here. First is this particular report was created on, February 5th, it looks like, or 3rd of 2020. And every time we create a new report, they're all time-stamped. And as that report's created, the template goes and it pulls the data that we want off of our server, and then it populates this report for that specific area. Now in this report, you'll see here, these county profiles are 4 pages, so we're seeing pages 1 and 2. The idea is if we were to print them and take them somewhere for a meeting to hand out, we print them as 11 by 17 fanfold, but you wouldn't have to do that. You can just print them out as a 4-page PDF. But this particular one includes the most recent ACS data that was released in December, as well as anything else that is released as soon as we put in our database. It's available in this report. Our reports will do, like the county profiles here, we'll do a review of all the cities that are in the community or in that county. So here we see, I think there's 13 cities that are contained, at least partially contained, within the boundary of Marshall County. And we provide the individual cities and their population, and we look at the 2000, 2010, and then the ACS data. So they get 3 pieces of information to have an idea of the growth of the county or the cities within it. We do compare the city growth with the county and the state total. We try to do that wherever we can to show at least the county or state total so they have a comparison. You'll also notice in this county, I mentioned this already, but one of the cities has an asterisk behind it. That's because that city actually crosses the county border. Each city tends to affiliate with one county or the other, but the public doesn't always know that. And if they live on the one side of the county, they might just always think that that is the county that the city is in. So we make sure any of the ones that cross over multiple counties do show up in multiple reports. So anything with an asterisk will have that. Let's see here. All right, and then on our second page, this is from an earlier version of this report, but this particular one is from 2016. And I just wanted to showcase that because all of those dates, whenever anything's updated, anything in our table that references a date is automatically updated so it corresponds correctly with the data that we are sharing. Also, again, like I said, a lot of times we will show additional county versus state information in the same report so that the user can understand how are they comparing. We have time series data, as you saw on the previous page. We have a lot of tables, but we also have many other types of visuals that are included. So again, here's in the bottom right corner, you see an age pyramid. One of the ways that we put out to make this work, I mean, if you had to handcraft each of these every year, it'd be quite painstaking to do. So we spent a lot of time developing a templating system that we could use to implement this. So each one of these boxes of information is actually its own piece of code and template that we can reuse in this document or another document, which you'll see in a minute. And most of what we had to figure out was the layout of where we wanted the information to be displayed. And that can be quite a challenge because whereas Marshall County, we just saw, had 13 cities, I believe this Polk County's got 18. And how do you fit 13, 18, or 5 pieces of information in the same area and have it look acceptable in terms of a graphic layout as a professional document? And that was one of the big challenges you have when you're trying to do many different reports, trying to look alike, is to how do you deal with where you have more information for one and less for the other. And so it's subtle, but what happens here is there's just a slight additional line spacing in between that, so we can try and fill that block of information as close as we can. Here's more information from this county, but one of the things I want to show you is that after each title for what you're looking at, there is a hypertext number that refers to the reference that tells us where that was sourced from. And at the bottom of our data for decision makers, we do provide all the sources for all the information that's displayed. We also provide, in many cases, a brief description of what the data is telling you. That meant the description had to be smart enough to know if the data, what was the change in the data from last year to this year, from the decennial to now, if would the population increase or decrease. So all of that is put into these reports, that intelligence, so that it can write out the proper description of what is going on in the data. So that was our county reports. We also have many other geographies that we provide. We have city level reports. We have extension region in Iowa. Currently, this is today's layout. We have 20 regions as are shown in the graphic here. Each region, we looked at the counties that made that region up and combined its data together so we can compare region to region, how are things changing. That helps us with programming for our extension staff so they can see are there certain regions that maybe need more focus on one program than another, what have you. We also looked at our legislative districts for both the House and Senate in Iowa. Here's one of our city profiles. And this is kind of fun. This is Ames, and this is where Iowa State University is located. And I pulled this one up because you can see in our age pyramids that this is very much a college town, with the largest percent of the population being between age 20 and 24. As we look at, we compare, we have both county and city profiles. How much duplication should we put into the reports was a question that we had to work through and we struggled with a little bit. And what we decided was some of the real basic demographic information was okay to share. And so in this case, yes, we have Lamar's listed with its population in our report for the county. But when you go to the city level report, then we actually start to break things down a little bit more and start to show gender. We still compare to the county and the state of Iowa. but we start to really fine tune some things and just make some references back to the county level. The other item that I should mention in this is you look at these two front pages, you'll see in the bottom right corner, we do list out our regional director's name and contact information along with the address for the county office. And so it is a challenge to keep that information up to date, but that's something we work with so that we can, whenever these are printed, they would provide at that moment when it was printed what the contact information was. So this becomes a really valuable tool for other extension staff to print out or have available when they go to other meetings talking about a particular topic. Next, we want to take a look at the themes. And so we started out with just general demographic profiles. We then moved into working with housing, 4-H, and health. I have a little bit of a larger version of the 4-H one right here, but we worked with Iowa 4-H and have presented a lot of their data in our report in terms of the programming that has been offered in that county, the number of youth involved. We also pulled in some of the educational data and family structure data into those reports. We're going to be building off of that and creating a family and education version of a data for decision maker that does not include 4-H data, and that's in the works right now as well. Oh, I should mention too, I included a graphic here. Our search interface, in this case, was for the population or the Iowa Senate districts. It's important when you have these different types of geographies to provide some type of visual reference as opposed to just thinking that people know what district number they're in, or even county. Some people have a hard time finding out or remembering, not which county they're in, but which region they're in. So you provide a visual graphic to it. They can say, oh, my county falls here, this is my city, and pick it. And then that's a way for them to lead to get to their report. And then finally, on the county health profiles, something that we introduced is the ability to have customized reports. And by this, what I mean is that when you generate the report, you are asked a couple of questions if you want to go with the default report, or for a few of the visuals that are in the report, would you like to swap it out with a different visual? And so the default table might have been the rate of county heart attack hospitalization, but maybe you'd be more interested in seeing an annualized averaged particulate matter concentration. Okay, you could swap that into that spot. Now that meant we had to figure out, I mentioned those modules at the beginning or spacing, that this module is designed to fit back in this other spot on this on this layout. And then here's an example of the interface that lets the users pick and choose which items they want showcased in the report. So in addition to our data for decision makers, as I wrap up here, we do have two other products that are built pretty much the same way. One of these is the Iowa Government Finance Initiative. Now, instead of being a 4-page report, this one is 40+ page report, has more narrative in it. It includes many of the demographic data sets, but it also, what it focuses on is the city budgets. And it provides for a 5-year trace back of what the budgeting amount has been in the city. So for example, the total revenue per capita change in Milford, Iowa versus the property tax revenue per capita. It's all the information that the cities submit in their annual budget back to the state of Iowa. We have worked with the state of Iowa to collect that data, to clean it, and to put it into a fiscal conditions report that can then be shared with the general public. It's easier to understand than a spreadsheet, and it also provides them the ability to see trend data as they're working with it. So between this and the city DDM or the county DDM, we're providing a lot of information to our clientele. Taking a shift from that, we're using the same technology and process to work with AgMark on producing commodity reports. And these commodity reports basically focus on the different commodities. So let's say apples, for instance. We will look at the production of apples in a particular county, and we have retrieved the various data sets on that and put that into a 2 to 4 page report depending upon the commodity. If you ever thought that working with demographic data was difficult, that's easy. Commodity data is really hard because there are so many different variables, and there's really fewer standards from state to state because of what they grow. One state might provide you data every year. Another state might do it every 7 years or 5 years. Some states will have the varieties provided. Other states don't provide the varieties that were produced. So you have a lot of variability in the type of data to produce. So that's one of the things that we've been having to work through as we make these reports. And so I almost kept us on time. I know I spoke really fast at the beginning, but it's 4:01. Do we have time for a
Yeah, we have a time for a few questions. We got a little late start. The one question, and I know you talked about some of the data, but Chris wants to know, Daniel, I'm sorry. Do you customize detailed information related to climate, energy, and resource use?
Okay, so within our portal, we have had some of the climate and energy data, but one of the things we actually need to have for us to really make a good data for decision maker report is we do want to have a what I call a domain expert working with us, and that can help guide us through how that data should be presented and put together. So we have data, we just don't have enough of it to necessarily put in to make an actual data for decision makers and to have someone that might champion that. Our housing, for example, our housing data report, we have on staff people that are focused on housing. We have extension specialists in housing. And so they are consultants, or like I call them domain experts. They'll help guide us and use their expertise to help shape how those things look. So we do have some people don't get me wrong, we have people that are working with environment and energy. It's just we haven't had enough content and requests to do that one yet. We've looked at some of the COVID data. I said I would mention this. And as we started to work with that, we decided that data was too fluid at the moment to present in terms of some of the medical parts of that. So we have used other venues to share that data and reference it. However, we are ramping up and looking at some of the other economic indicators and the job data as it's starting to take better form, so we can bring it in and make similar reports to this to share.
Okay, what software are you using to generate these reports?
Okay, so let me start at the database side of things. We use 2 databases, but for the most part, we just use a MySQL database. The other one's a Postgres database, but that one only really matters for our market maker reports because they have a bigger spatial mapping piece that's part of them. But so we use that from our database in the back end. For the development of the PDFs, we are using, again, 2 softwares, and you can email me later if you want more specifics, but one is JavaScript or Node.js based PDF creation software. And the other one is a PHP based software. That's what we originally started with. And that's called TCPDF, if someone wants to look that up. But they both have been very stable and they work quite well. The graphs that we have on the page are, I gotta think for a second. I can't think of the name of the library right now, but it's a free library. There's nothing that for the production of these. Almost everything is open source. Yeah, everything's open source. The only cost we have really is our time and server hosting.
Okay, somebody wants to know, is your database linked directly with sources to update automatically with the latest, most up-to-date data? If so, how did you do it?
Yes and no. We started out doing that using various services. That did start to add up some cost to us. And so we have stopped doing that. One of the things we found out is you got to be careful if you automate everything to go in and pull stuff in, because well, the idea is really nice that it's just going to go and do everything on its own, and you can just walk away and let it do it. The vendors don't always play nice with you. If you've played with the Census API, you'll know things have changed there. They've changed frequently at other vendors as well of data sets. So you've got to still be quite involved with it. So while we do have scripts written to help us go and acquire the data and bring it in, we are managing more so on a schedule that we know when that data is available and when we need to it's almost pressed go, but not quite. Be able to go get that data. With the ACS data that came out this year, there were one thing that they did at Census was they changed a lot of the header names to be compliant with their new API. That was fine if you only needed 1 year, but we do trend data. So we had to be able to make sure we had the new header data and our old header data and could combine them together. So we had to do some translation in between. And so that took just a little bit of extra time. But on some cases, when it works really well, it's simply a download. We do a manual upload, a few more minutes of work, and it's done. So I think our best, when things are working smoothly, usually if the data came out one day, the next day it was available in the system.
Great. Well, that's it for questions. I'd like to thank Chris and Eric and Paul, Peter, Myra, Lisa, and Daniel for the presentations today. Stop the recording.